HOA tried to arrest me on my own shoreline. I moved into my grandfather's lake house, and the HOA called 911 before I could even unlock the door. Something felt off. Too aggressive, too fast. So I pushed back, and that's when I uncovered the truth. The hall they ruled from was built on my family's land. If you've ever fought for what's yours, hit subscribe and stay with me. This one gets wild. The tires of my old Ford Ranger crunched over the gravel driveway as I rolled to a stop beside the lake house I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Wyoming air has a certain sharpness to it, a clean, cold bite full of pine and distant snowmelt. I stepped out, feeling that mix of nerves and relief that comes when life finally gives you one quiet moment after months of noise. The lake stretched out like a sheet of polished steel, ripples catching the early morning sun. Dust swirled around my boots. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I popped open the rusted ammo box my grandfather had left me, his handwriting still visible on the lid. Inside, tied with a leather strip older than I was, lay the original deed to this property. Mercer Lake House. 3 acres of shoreline he'd carved out with his own hands. My inheritance, my homecoming, my fresh start. I ran my fingers over the paper. The edges were brittle, but the ink was bold. Legal, final, mine. That piece lasted all of 15 seconds. Red and blue lights burst across the water from the ridge above, flashing hard against the lake's surface like warning flares. The sound hit next, sirens echoing through the pines, bouncing off the hills until it felt like they were coming from every direction. I turned, squinting into the sudden commotion. 3 sheriff's SUVs barreled down the access road, gravel spitting beneath their tires as they boxed in my truck like I was a fugitive on the run. "What in the world?" I muttered. Before I could take a single step, another vehicle fishtailed to a stop behind them. A glossy white crossover with a bright magenta HOA sticker on the windshield. The door flew open, and out stepped a woman in a tailored peach blazer, silver hair pinned so tightly it looked lacquered. She held a clipboard like a weapon. Marjorie Elliston, president of the Clearwater Ridge Homeowners Association. Her heels stabbed into the dirt as she marched toward me. "Officers!" she shrilled into the mountain breeze. "Arrest him! That man is trespassing on community property. He broke into our lakeside cabin." I blinked. "Your what?" "This house." She jabbed her finger toward the cabin, my cabin. "This structure belongs to the HOA. This man is attempting to claim it as his own." The closest deputy, a tall man with a sunburned neck and mirrored shades, stepped toward me with his hand hovering near his holster, not touching it, but close enough to make my stomach knot. "Sir, I need you to keep your hands visible." I raised them slowly, deed still clutched between my fingers. "Deputy, I think there's been a very big misunderstanding." Marjorie scoffed. "Oh, please. Every scammer says that. He probably printed that paper off the internet." The humiliation hit me like a slap. I hadn't even stepped inside my grandfather's house yet, and somehow I was being treated like a criminal. The other deputies circled around, tension rising in the air like distant thunder. Even the birds had gone silent. "Ma'am," I said through my teeth, "this property has been in my family for—" "This property," she cut in sharply, "was annexed into Clearwater Ridge HOA jurisdiction after a unanimous vote 2 years ago. It is now protected community real estate, and you are unlawfully entering it." I stared at her. "Annexed? That's impossible. My grandfather never sold it." One deputy exchanged looks with another. They weren't convinced, but they weren't siding with me either. Marjorie folded her arms, victorious. "You should choose your next words carefully, young man. Trespassing, attempted break-in, destruction of HOA signage." "What signage?" I snapped. She pointed smugly toward a flimsy plastic stake lying broken in the grass, as if it had been placed there 5 minutes ago. My irritation simmered hot under my collar. Wind brushed across the lake, rattling the metal gate beside the porch. I hadn't touched a thing. Not a window, not a lock, not a board. And yet here I was, surrounded by law enforcement, because a woman in peach polyester decided she owned the shoreline. The lead deputy cleared his throat. "Sir, do you have any proof this house is yours?" The lake went still. My heartbeat wasn't. Cliffhanger tightening like a noose. I lifted the deed slowly. "This," I said, "is all the proof you'll ever need." But even as the words left my mouth, I saw Marjorie smirk, like she already had a plan to tear that proof apart. The morning wind pushed through the pines, brushing cold across my neck as the deputies leaned in to inspect the old deed. The paper fluttered slightly in my grip, the ink shining where sunlight hit it through the cabin's porch beams. Deputy Cole Hargrove, the one with the sunburned neck and the unreadable expression, took it gently between gloved fingers. He studied it longer than the others, eyebrows drawing closer together. I thought maybe, just maybe, logic would win this round. Then Marjorie snapped her fingers. "Deputy," she said sharply, "don't waste your time. This entire tract was resurveyed 2 years ago. I have the updated map right here." One of the board members jogged from her SUV with a rolled-up tube of glossy paper. Marjorie unfurled it with dramatic flair, holding it wide so the deputies could see. My stomach sank as soon as the lake outline appeared. The map was fresh, bright, printed on high-grade laminate. Too new, too perfect. A thick red line wrapped around my shoreline like a noose. "There," she said triumphantly, tapping the edge of the property with a manicured nail. "Clearwater Ridge, HOA jurisdiction. Unanimous vote. Properly filed. Properly stamped. Properly recorded." I stepped closer. Something felt wrong. Not just legally wrong, but visually wrong. The signatures along the bottom were oddly uniform, like they'd been carved from the same pen stroke. No jagged edges, no pressure differences, no left-hand slant. Even the spacing looked suspicious, too evenly aligned for 9 different people. "That signature," I said, pointing at the surveyor's name, "that's supposed to be Lionel Dempsey. He writes like he's wrestling a rattlesnake. That right there looks like a computer font." Marjorie's eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing Clearwater Ridge of forgery?" "I'm accusing someone of printing a map off a home office computer," I said. Deputy Cole angled the map to catch better light. His jaw tightened. Not much, but enough for me to notice. Something about this didn't sit right with him either, though he wasn't about to challenge Marjorie publicly. Not yet. Another deputy, younger, more eager to please, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, this looks official." "It is official," Marjorie insisted. "Filed at the county clerk's office, stamped by the zoning board, and reviewed by Judge Harmon himself." I swallowed hard. Judge Harmon was a name folks whispered around these parts. Old, entrenched, friendly with developers. If he had stamped anything for the HOA, that meant they had more reach than I realized. Deputy Cole handed the deed back to me. "Mr. Mercer, your paperwork appears legitimate, but we have conflicting documents. Until we verify which one's recognized by the county, we can't take sides." Marjorie pounced, which means he must vacate immediately. The wind picked up again, pushing dust across the yard in thin snakes. The lake rippled as if it too felt the tension. My irritation hardened into something heavier, a slow burn beneath the ribs. "Vacate?" I said. "This is my grandfather's house. You don't get to rewrite the entire shoreline because it fits your expansion plans." Her smirk returned. "We don't rewrite. We enforce." She leaned in close enough for me to smell her hairspray. "And we already voted to fence the property. 48 hours. After that, if you're still here, the sheriff will escort you off." Deputy Cole stiffened but stayed quiet. His silence said enough. He didn't like this, but he was trapped in procedure until he saw evidence strong enough to override their claim. Folded the deed, and slipped it carefully into the inside pocket of my jacket, feeling my pulse thrum under it. My grandfather's handwriting pressed against my chest like a warning from the grave. "Deputy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you can't let them build a fence across private land because of one questionable map." Cole exhaled slowly. "Mr. Mercer, I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying I need time to verify." Marjorie clapped her hands once, sharply. "Perfect. While he verifies, we proceed." She turned to her board members. "Put the notice on his door." A woman in a lavender scarf hurried forward and slapped a bright orange violation slip on the cabin door, slanted, uneven, like a sheriff's badge pinned by a child. The paper flapped in the breeze like a surrender flag. "Unlawful occupancy," it read in bold. I stared at it. My inherited house, my family's land, my name on the deed, and an HOA violation slip was the first thing posted on it. Marjorie stepped back, satisfied. "Welcome to Clearwater Ridge. 48 hours, Mr. Mercer." The deputies returned to their vehicles, engines rumbling to life one by one. Cole lingered behind, meeting my eyes through the dust cloud the other SUVs kicked up as they turned back up the road. "I'll look into it," he said quietly. Then he followed the others, tires grinding over the gravel until all that remained was the fading echo of sirens disappearing over the ridge. Marjorie lingered only long enough to give me one last look over her shoulder, like she'd already won something I didn't know I was fighting for. When her SUV sped off, silence fell across the property. Even the lake seemed to hold its breath. I looked down at the old deed, at the orange violation slip fluttering on the door, at the fake map still lying open in the dirt where Marjorie left it. And for the first time, a thought crossed my mind that chilled me deeper than the Wyoming wind. If they were willing to forge a map, what else had they rewritten? 48 hours, and the war for my grandfather's land had officially begun. The afternoon sun sank low behind the ridge as I stood on the porch, the violation slip still flapping like a taunt in the breeze. Dust drifted through the beams of fading light, sparkling faintly before settling on the aging wooden steps. The lake had quieted. Even the small waves licking the shore seemed to move with caution, like they knew something was brewing. I took a slow breath, letting the cold air steady me. I wasn't leaving, not now, not ever. I spent the next hour walking the perimeter of the property, kicking at the dirt, checking the old marker stakes my grandfather had hammered in decades ago. Some were still standing, sun-bleached and crooked. Others had been ripped up and tossed aside, leaving raw patches of disturbed earth behind. Heavy boot tracks led straight from the HOA's direction. My irritation hardened with every step. Just before dusk settled fully, I heard the soft crunch of gravel behind me. "You Mercer?" a woman asked, her voice low and wary. I turned to see a woman around my age standing a few yards away. Dark hair pulled into a loose braid, denim jacket faded along the elbows, camera hanging around her neck like a lifeline. She kept glancing toward the road, like she expected someone to follow her. "That depends," I said. "Who's asking?" She stepped closer but stayed just outside my porch's shadow. "Dana Whitlock. I live 2 houses down. I, saw the whole show this morning. Figured you might need a friendly face." I studied her for a moment. There was something tired behind her eyes, something I recognized, someone who'd been worn down by the same people now trying to push me out. "Friendly faces are in short supply today," I said. "You're welcome to sit, if you want." She came up the steps quietly, boots barely making a sound. The porch boards groaned as if relieved to feel someone respectful walk across them for a change. She glanced at the violation slip, eyebrows lifting. "They hit you with that already?" she said. "Fast, even for them." "Seems like a pattern," I said. "You've been here a while?" 4 years, she answered, 19 violations so far. 19? She nodded grimly. One for having a bird feeder. Another for leaving my porch light on past 10. My personal favorite, unauthorized use of a welcome mat. Marjorie doesn't like color patterns she didn't approve. I let out a dry breath. Sounds about right. She looked toward the lake, its surface turning darker as night crept in. Listen, I don't know what they're telling you, but this property, it's not theirs. Never has been. Yeah, well, I said, pointing toward the broken survey stakes. They're trying real hard to make it look like it is. Dana crouched, brushing her fingers lightly over one of the disturbed patches of dirt. They've been moving boundary markers all across this shoreline. I've caught them on camera twice. She tapped the lens hanging against her chest. Never got anything concrete enough to take to the county, though. They're careful. Too careful. A soft rustle from beyond the porch made us both turn. An older man stepped out from the trees, tall, wiry, with a thick gray beard and a fishing rod slung over one shoulder. His clothes carried the smell of river water and campfire smoke, someone who belonged to the land in a way HOA board members never would. You're Eli, he said, not asking, but stating. I knew your grandfather. Good man. Reed Calloway, Dana said quietly, introducing him before I could ask. Lives across the cove. Reed shifted his weight, eyes scanning the shoreline as if checking for unwanted company. Heard the sirens this morning. HOA at it again? At it still, I said. They think this is their house, their land. Reed let out a humorless huff. They don't think, son. They've convinced themselves, but they're building that belief on theft. Simple as that. Dana folded her arms. Tell him, Reed. Reed leaned his fishing rod against the rail and stepped closer, voice dropping. That HOA hall they're so proud of, the big one by the entrance with the fancy stone siding? That building ain't standing on HOA land. I frowned. What do you mean? Reed looked me square in the eyes. It's standing on Mercer land. I felt the wind shift, cold across the back of my neck. My family? My grandfather's? Reed nodded slowly. A long time ago, paperwork went missing. Back when folks trusted the wrong people. And once Marjorie got president, things started disappearing faster. Property records, building permits, even old survey maps. A knot formed in my gut. You're telling me the HOA hall, their headquarters, is sitting on land they stole? Reed's voice was as steady as the lake at dawn. That hall is yours, son. Or at least it was. They covered the truth with concrete, stone, and meetings no one was invited to. Dana touched my arm lightly. If you want answers, real ones, start with the basement of that hall. That's where they keep what they don't want the county to see. The porch light above us flickered as if warning us. A sudden breeze whipped through the pines, shifting branches and kicking up a swirl of dust across the yard. Every instinct in me sharpened. You're both sure about this? I asked. Dana nodded. Sure enough to know you're in danger if you don't fight back. Reed grabbed his fishing rod. And sure enough to know you ain't alone. I looked between them, the neighbor with the camera and the old fisherman with a backbone stronger than any HOA charter. For the first time since stepping foot on the property, I felt something other than irritation or confusion. I felt resolve. Reed hoisted the rod over his shoulder. Check the basement, Eli. Answers are down there. As they headed back toward the road, night fully settled over the lake. Crickets awakened, and the water gleamed dark and glassy. The violation slip continued to tap softly against the cabin door, like a heartbeat counting down. 48 hours. And I had just learned the HOA's house of cards started on my family's foundation. Tomorrow night, I'd enter that basement, and whatever I found would change everything. But the following evening didn't wait politely for my nerves. A cold Wyoming dusk settled fast, dragging long shadows across the lake as I walked the winding path toward the HOA hall. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, loud in the quiet. A storm front was building somewhere over the ridge, pushing a low hum of wind through the pines. Every gust carried the scent of lake water and old timber, familiar, grounding, but tonight my pulse thumped too hard to enjoy it. Clearwater Ridge, HOA Hall rose ahead like a smug monument to overreach. The stone facade caught the last of the sunlight, giving the building an amber glow that made it look almost holy, if you didn't know the truth beneath it. I ran a hand along the metal railing beside the steps, cold as a threat. Dana's warning repeated in my mind, steady and quiet. Start with the basement. The hall buzzed with chatter inside. Tonight was their monthly community meeting. Perfect cover. I slipped into the back of the room, staying low. A dozen board members gathered around a long oak table, Marjorie in her usual spot at the head, sharp blazer, tighter smile. She ranted about violation quotas and fence expansion plans, her voice bouncing off the stone walls like she was preaching to a choir no one dared question. While they bickered over lawn heights and mailbox dimensions, I slipped down the hallway toward the utility door marked Staff Only. The lock was rusty, typical HOA, polished on the outside, crumbling underneath. A gentle push and twist, and the door creaked open just enough for me to slide through. The basement stairs groaned beneath my weight, each step sounding like a warning. Damp air rose, thick with dust and old paper. The walls carried the smell of mildew and forgotten things. At the bottom, I clicked on my small flashlight, its beam slicing through the shadows. Rows of metal filing cabinets stood like iron soldiers, some dented, some rusted along the edges. Boxes were piled on shelves, maps, binders, loose papers spilling out like they'd been shoved in a hurry. But one cabinet in the corner drew my eye immediately. Unlike the others, it was old, older than the hall itself, made of dark wood instead of metal, a brass handle tarnished to green. My heart kicked harder. I tugged on the drawer. Stuck. I pulled again, firmer this time. It jerked open with a sharp metallic snap, dust puffing into the beam of my flashlight. Inside were rolled documents tied with twine, yellowed along the edges. I lifted the first one carefully, feeling its weight, its age. The paper crackled in my hands as I unrolled it across a work table. Blue ink, faded stamps, handwritten notes in margins. Mercer property, proposed structure, 1965. I felt the air leave my lungs. Eve. My great-grandfather's signature sat at the bottom corner, the same looping cursive that appeared in his letters. He had drawn the building's footprint, square, modest, meant for gatherings, not for HOA empires. The blueprint was clear. The hall stood on Mercer land, not HOA land, not community land, private land, stolen land. The walls felt colder suddenly. The room seemed smaller. I pulled out my phone and photographed every inch of the blueprint. Front, back, stamps, margins. Then I set it aside and reached for the next roll. More plans, more notes. A series of surveys showing the original shoreline boundaries. Plats my grandfather must have stored somewhere before the hall was built. Every document told the same story. The Mercer family gave permission to build a small meeting hall, not for ownership transfer, not for annexation, just a simple agreement, never meant to become a power base for a tyrant like Marjorie Elliston. And then I heard footsteps above. Heavy ones. I froze. The basement ceiling was thin enough that voices drifted through like whispers in a church. A man's voice, deep, irritated, followed by the sharp click of dress shoes. Marjorie asked me to check something in the storage rooms, the man said. Ken Abbott, HOA treasurer. My pulse thudded hard, echoing in my ears. I rolled the blueprint carefully, tucking it behind a stack of boxes, I had just finished sliding the drawer halfway shut when the basement door swung open. Light spilled down the steps, silhouetting a broad figure. "Who's down there?" Ken called out. I clicked off my flashlight, backing into the narrow space between filing cabinets. My breath slowed, quiet, controlled. Ken's shoes thumped heavily on the wooden steps as he descended, each step shaking dust loose from the rafters. He reached the bottom a moment later, scanning the room. Even in the dim light, his eyes were sharp, numbers guy sharp. The kind of man who notices when a pen has been moved half an inch. He walked toward the wooden cabinet, straight toward it. My stomach tightened. Ken tugged on the drawer. It stuck. His brow furrowed. He pulled again, harder this time. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The drawer slid open, but only halfway. He frowned deeper, tapping the top edge with 2 fingers. "That's weird," he muttered. "It was fully closed this afternoon." He crouched, examining the inside. My heart pounded slow and heavy like a warning drum. His hand hovered over the stack where I'd hidden the blueprint, inches away. Then something upstairs crashed, glass breaking, people shrieking, chaos erupting. Ken stood up straight. "What now?" he growled, turning on his heel and rushing up the stairs without closing the drawer. I waited until the noise above rose to a roar before slipping out from behind the cabinets. My legs felt shaky, but my mind was clear. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was truth. This was evidence. I reached for the blueprint I'd hidden, rolled it tight, and slid it carefully into my coat. Footsteps raced overhead, panic, shouting, the perfect chaos to slip out unnoticed. As I climbed the basement steps, every instinct in me knew the same thing. They'd hidden their lies for years. Tonight, the first truth finally saw daylight, and someone upstairs had just triggered the next storm. Ken Abbott knew something was off, and now he knew I'd been here. By the time I slipped out of the HOA hall and into the night, the storm had drifted closer. Wind whipped across the parking lot, carrying bits of dry leaves and the faint metallic scent of rain. My breath fogged in the cold air as I kept my head down, blending into the shadows until I reached the trail leading back toward my grandfather's lake house. Every step felt heavier. The blueprint inside my coat crinkled softly with my movement, a fragile lifeline, proof of something far bigger than boundary stakes and violation slips. But with every rustle of that old paper, I also felt the weight of the HOA's corruption pressing down harder. The moon hid behind a swell of clouds as I reached the cabin doorway. The orange violation notice still flapped stubbornly in the wind, its corner torn loose. I pulled it off and tossed it inside, letting it land on the worn wooden floorboards. Its bright color looked like graffiti on a church. I shut the door behind me just as thunder rolled across the lake. The cabin dimmed as the overhead bulb flickered, then steadied. The old place creaked with every gust, the wooden beams groaning like they remembered winters harsher than this. I set the blueprint on the kitchen table and slid into a chair, elbows resting on the cool surface. For a few quiet minutes, I studied every line, every curve of my great-grandfather's pen. I felt like a man holding a ghost's testimony. A sharp knock shattered the silence. I froze. No one knocked out here. Not at night. Not during a storm. Another knock, harder this time. I reached the door and cracked it open. The porch light buzzed overhead, casting a tired yellow glow across the figure standing there. Marjorie Elliston. Her peach blazer was gone, replaced by a dark coat wrapped tightly around her rigid frame. Her hair, usually sculpted to perfection, frizzed in the wind. But her eyes, those were the same. Cold, calculating, ticked like a metronome counting down to her next command. "You broke into the hall," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. I leaned against the doorframe. "Did I?" "Don't play innocent, Mr. Mercer." Her voice sliced through the wind. Ken saw the basement drawer open. You left things moved. Papers out of place. The board will pursue this. That's your first mistake, I said, assuming you own the place. Her jaw tightened. We have every right to protect our records. Especially the ones you forged? She stepped forward, eyes narrowing like a hawk about to dive. You're treading on dangerous ground, and you're making yourself a very unwelcome presence in Clearwater Ridge. I let out a humorless laugh. Pretty sure I was unwelcome the moment I parked my truck. She didn't smile. Instead, she thrust a thick envelope into my chest. I didn't take it. She shoved it harder until I had no choice but to grip it with both hands. Consider that your final notice. 14 violations. 14. All issued today. Her tone dripped with triumph. We intend to make your stay here very unpleasant. Unlawful occupancy, illegal dock installation, hazardous stacking of firewood. She listed off mechanically, as if reciting a prayer she'd practiced in front of a mirror. I haven't even done anything, I said. You showed up, she replied. That's quite enough. She turned on her heel and marched down the steps, coat flapping like wings of a restless vulture. Her SUV headlights cut across the yard as she pulled away, leaving only darkness and the faint echo of her engine behind. I stepped back inside, shutting the door firmly. 14 violations. In one day. I tore open the envelope. She hadn't exaggerated. The stack of papers slapped onto the table, fanning across the blueprint like an attack covering a defense. Each violation came with a hefty fine, hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars. Some were absurd. One accused me of unauthorized soil displacement for a hole some wildlife had dug. Another fined me for firewood that wasn't stacked to HOA aesthetic standards. I rubbed my temples. This is war, I whispered. Thunder cracked overhead. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the cabin kept me awake. Every rustle of the trees outside sounded like footsteps, and somewhere in the mix of wind and thunder, I kept thinking I heard the faint growl of idling engines, HOA patrol trucks prowling, waiting. At dawn, I walked out onto the porch. The rain had passed, leaving behind the smell of wet earth and pine needles. Mist hovered above the lake like a soft veil, glowing faintly under the rising sun. But the beauty was broken by the sound of engines once again. 2 HOA patrol trucks idled at the edge of my driveway, their headlights on, exhaust puffing into the cold morning. The drivers sat still, arms crossed, claiming their watch over land they didn't own. I felt a fresh surge of frustration, but another sound caught my attention before I could react. A mailbox clang. A courier truck rolled down the gravel road, splashing through puddles. The driver stepped out, handed me a thick, certified envelope, and left without a word. I opened it on the porch. Clearwater County Court summons. Trespass on HOA facilities. Mandatory appearance, 72 hours. I exhaled slowly, watching the mist swirl from my breath. They weren't trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to bury me. As I stepped back inside, something shifted in me. Frustration turned into resolve. Confusion hardened into purpose. I looked again at the blueprint, at the papers they'd tried to hide, at the crooked stakes they'd moved in the night. They wanted a fight? Good. Because now I finally understood the stakes. And I had no intention of losing my grandfather's land to a board of tyrants with a copier and an agenda. The sheriff needed to see what I'd found, and the HOA would not like what came next. Morning fog still hugged the lake when I stepped onto the porch. Blueprint rolled under my arm. The court summons tucked in my jacket pocket like a bruise. The world felt muted, as if the wind itself was waiting to see which direction this whole mess would tip. Even the HOA patrol trucks had vanished, leaving only the hiss of mist lifting off the water. Deputy Cole arrived 20 minutes after I called him. His cruiser eased down the gravel drive, tires crunching over wet stone. He stepped out slowly, shoulders squared, hat pulled low. Cole had the look of a man who'd spent his life between ranch fences and county lines. Steady hands, steady eyes, steady burden. He shut the door with a quiet thud and walked up the steps like he didn't want to startle anything. "Morning, Eli," he said. "Got your message. You sounded urgent." "You could say that," I replied. I led him inside, the wooden floor creaking under our boots. The blueprint lay on the kitchen table, weighted down by the old ammo box. Cole glanced at it, but didn't sit right away. Instead, he studied me for a beat. "You all right? You look like you didn't sleep." "Hard to sleep with headlights watching your driveway," I said. He sighed under his breath. "That'd be the HOA patrols. Been doing that more often lately. Folks complain, but Marjorie always has some explanation lined up." "Yeah, well," I said, "she hasn't seen this." I unrolled the blueprint carefully, flattening it across the table. Cole leaned in, eyes narrowing as he scanned the faded lines, the signatures, the old stamps. He traced one finger down the boundary line, following the curve of the shoreline drawn in my great-grandfather's unmistakable hand. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. "The hall basement, hidden in an old cabinet." I met his gaze. "Your HOA president has been sitting on it for decades." Cole's jaw tightened. Not anger yet, just that first spark of something shifting. I pulled out the photos I'd taken too, pictures of the old surveys, the plats, the original shoreline markers. He looked through them one by one, the room quiet except for the soft rustle of paper and the wind brushing against the cabin windows. After a minute, he set everything down and rubbed the back of his neck. "Eli, this looks bad for them, really bad, but I gotta ask, you sure these documents weren't planted?" "Planted?" I shook my head. "Cole, these are older than both of us. That signature belongs to Samuel Mercer, and that blueprint, my grandfather told me about it when I was 10. He said our family helped build the hall." Cole's eyes sharpened. "Help build? Not donate the land?" "Exactly. They used our land. But the ownership never shifted. Marjorie's crew twisted the story, hid the proof, built their empire on it." He stepped back, letting out a long breath. "If this is real, the HOA's charter is sitting on a rotten foundation." "More rotten than you know," I said. "They forged the new maps. They moved boundary stakes. They tried to run me off with fake violations." His brow furrowed. "I've seen signs. Small things. Complaints from folks who don't usually complain. Fees that seemed steep. Paperwork that came late or changed without explanation." He paused. "But seeing it all laid out? That's different." I slid the court summons across the table. He picked it up, reading the charges for trespassing on HOA facilities. His eyes flickered with something between disbelief and frustration. "They're accusing you of trespassing on your own family's land," he muttered. "That's insane." "It's calculated," I said, "and it's escalating." Cole dropped into a chair, elbows on his knees. He stared at the summons like it personally offended him. "Marjorie's been pushing boundaries for years, but I didn't know it went this far." "She's counting on people not knowing," I said, "counting on you to trust her paperwork over mine." He gestured toward the blueprint. This is the kind of thing that blows open a case. That's why I called you." Cole stood again, pacing slowly across the cabin. His boots thudded against the wood in a steady rhythm. "All right," he said finally. "Here's what I'm gonna do. I'll take this to the county surveyor. We'll compare it to the original land plats. If your family's name shows up where this says it does, Marjorie's expansion maps don't mean squat." A gust of wind rattled the old iron latch on the door. The lake outside was beginning to shimmer as sunlight pushed through the fog. "But," Cole added, voice dropping to something heavier, You need to be careful. If Marjorie realizes you found something that can unravel her authority, she won't back down. She'll double down. She already has, I said quietly. 14 violations, court summons, night patrols. Cole's expression hardened. Then she's scared. He walked back to the table and tapped the blueprint once, gently. This is the first real crack in her armor. Before I could answer, he stepped toward the window, eyes narrowing. Is that? I followed his gaze. Across the lake, bright construction lights flickered to life near the HOA hall. Even in daylight, they burned like spotlights, too bright, too deliberate. And behind them, machinery moved, shadows of loaders and large utility trucks idling beside the hall. What are they doing? I whispered. Construction crews shouldn't be there at this hour, Cole said, especially not without county approval. He turned to me. Stay put. Keep this safe. If they're moving equipment at this time of day, something's up, and I need to find out what. As he stepped onto the porch, the wind carried the low rumble of engines across the lake. Something big was happening at the hall, something Marjorie didn't want anyone to see. Cole paused before climbing into his cruiser. Eli, lock your doors tonight. If she thinks you're onto her, she might try to get ahead of whatever's coming. He drove off, gravel spitting behind the tires. I stood on the porch long after the cruiser disappeared, eyes fixed on the distant construction lights. The lake rippled beneath the growing wind, carrying the faint clang of metal and voices from across the water. The fog had fully lifted now. But the truth? The truth was only getting murkier. It was cover-up work, and I was running out of time. By nightfall, the construction lights across the lake had grown brighter, flooding the shoreline around the HOA hall with a harsh white glow. The sound carried too, the metallic clatter of equipment, the grinding hum of engines, hurried voices echoing across the water. No one performed routine maintenance under floodlights. This was panic. This was scrambling. This was the kind of activity people did when they knew someone had found what wasn't meant to be found. And I had found it. The wind had shifted colder by the time I met Dana on the narrow trail behind the cabin. She'd come bundled in a heavy flannel jacket, camera hanging around her neck like always, breath clouding the air. You see the lights? She whispered. They've been on for hours. She tightened her grip on the strap. They're not repairing anything. I saw workers carrying out boxes earlier, not construction supplies, records, which meant they were clearing out evidence. Where's Reed? I asked. Already at the ridge, she said. Said he wants a full look before we go in. I didn't ask how she'd convinced him. Reed was the kind of man who moved only when justice outweighed comfort. If he was watching from the ridge, he believed something real was at stake. We moved through the trees, staying low. Pine branches brushed against my jacket, scattering droplets of melted frost across my sleeves. The lake below shimmered under the floodlights, the once peaceful water reflecting chaos back at the shore. By the time we reached the ridge, Reed was crouched behind a fallen log, binoculars pressed to his eyes. He didn't look back as we approached. You both took your time, he murmured. They're running like ants kicked out of a hill. I leaned beside him, peering down toward the hall. Workers rushed in and out of the back entrance, arms full of boxes, rolled papers, and binders. One man tossed a stack of old files into a dumpster with a careless thud. My stomach turned. They were destroying history, my family's history, this community's history, one box at a time. They know someone found the basement cabinet, I whispered. Reed handed me the binoculars. Look harder. I did. And that's when I saw it. A section of the hall's basement wall, previously solid stone, was now partially removed, exposing a dark crawl space behind it. A worker dragged out more boxes from inside. Dust billowed like smoke behind him. They opened up the wall? Dana breathed. Since when? That crawl space wasn't in the blueprint, I said. No, Reed replied. It was added later. Hidden? Only reason you hide a space in a building is if you're storing something you don't want on the books, or something too dangerous for anyone to ever see. A chill crawled across my spine. If the blueprint I found was big, what else were they hiding behind a false wall? Reed stood, brushing off his knees. We go now, before they empty it all. Dana's breath quickened. You sure this is a good idea? No, Reed said, but it's the right one. We slipped down the ridge, staying close to the tree line. When we reached the far edge of the hall's property, Dana tugged my sleeve and pointed toward a dim service door at the back. A worker had propped it open while loading boxes. This was our window. Reed murmured, We go quiet. No hero stuff. We moved single file, stepping through grass dampened by evening dew. When the worker retreated inside again, Reed signaled. We darted across the open space and slipped through the propped door. Inside, the hallway was filled with dust, the air thick with the scent of mildew, old wood, and something sharp, like solvent. Most of the workers were further inside the hall, their voices echoing from the meeting room. We kept to the shadows, moving toward the basement stairs. Every step creaked, but the rush of activity masked the sound. When we reached the bottom, the sight made my breath catch. They'd torn open the basement wall completely now, tools scattered around the floor. Where the cabinet once sat, boxes were overturned, papers tossed aside like trash. But behind the broken stones, a dark cavity stretched back several feet. I flicked on my small flashlight. The beam cut through the dust. Rows of water-damaged boxes, a filing trunk older than the hall itself, a metal ledger book bound in cracked leather. I stepped forward, heart pounding. The ledger sat at the front, as if waiting. I lifted it out carefully, dust puffing in a cloud. Dana angled her camera light toward the pages as I opened it. Rows of handwritten entries filled the pages. Dates, fines, addresses. But the numbers didn't match any official records. These fines were never credited to community accounts. They went somewhere else, a slush fund. And then, halfway through the book, a line item made my chest tighten. Mercer tracked, unclaimed, seized by board vote. Signature, L. Dempsey. But the signature, it wasn't Lionel Dempsey's handwriting. It wasn't even close. Forged, I whispered. Completely forged. Dana leaned in. And look, more entries after that. Property seizures, expansions, illegal votes, all signed off by the same fake signature. Reed swore under his breath. This is it, Eli. This is the nail for their coffin. As I photographed every page, a voice boomed from upstairs. Check the basement! Someone's down there! The footsteps thundered like a stampede. Reed grabbed my shoulder. Move, now! Dana killed her light. I tucked the ledger into my jacket under the blueprint. Together, we backed toward the far storage shelves, slipping behind the taller stacks of boxes just as the basement lights snapped on. Boots hit the floor hard. 2 workers, then 3, then the unmistakable silhouette of Ken Abbott stepped in behind them. He scanned the room, eyes sweeping through the dust haze. Someone's been here again, he muttered. A worker asked, Should we clear everything out? No, Ken said. Not until Marjorie gets here. She wants to see it herself. He kicked a loose paper across the floor, gaze sharp and searching. If they got into the crawl space, he said slowly, they might have found the ledger. My pulse thudded loud enough I was sure he'd hear it. We'll find whoever did this, Ken added. Marjorie said, no more warnings. The workers nodded grimly and filed out behind him. When the footsteps faded, Reed exhaled. We're running out of luck. And time, Dana whispered. We slipped out the back door as another truck arrived at the hall, headlights slicing through the night like knives. As we hurried back toward the trees, the ledger heavy in my jacket, One thought pulsed through me. We had proof of decades of corruption. And now they knew someone had taken it. The wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of engines revving, and I realized something with cold clarity. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was about truth, and people willing to destroy anything to hide it. Tonight, we took their secrets. Tomorrow, they'd come looking for us, and they didn't even wait until sunrise. I woke to the grinding roar of machinery, deep, guttural, unmistakably close. The kind of noise that shakes the windows and makes the walls tremble like they're bracing for impact. The first light of dawn spilled across the cabin floorboards as I threw on my jacket and stepped out onto the porch. That's when I saw it. A full-sized yellow bulldozer, idling at the edge of my dock, its blade angled toward the weathered planks like it meant to carve them out of the earth. 2 HOA board members stood nearby in matching reflective vests, clearly staged for official duty. Behind them, Marjorie Elliston herself stood tall, arms crossed, her dark coat flapping in the morning wind like a banner of war. She looked up at me with a thin, victorious smile. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," she called out. "We're here under emergency authority to remove an unsafe, illegally constructed dock." I stepped down off the porch, boots crunching through frost-painted grass. That dock has stood for over 20 years. My grandfather built it with county permits. "Those permits," she said with sugary venom, "are no longer recognized under Clearwater Ridge guidelines. You don't have the right to remove anything from my property." She didn't break eye contact. "It's not your property." Before I could speak, she snapped her fingers. The bulldozer operator eased forward, engine revving louder. The metal blade inched toward the first support beam of the dock. My pulse kicked into gear. If they took down the dock, they'd claim it as evidence of my tampering. They'd twist it into justification for their seizure plans. They were trying to erase physical proof of my family's presence, one board at a time. That's when Deputy Cole's cruiser came sliding down the drive, gravel spraying under the tires. He killed the siren but left the lights flashing, stepping out in a hurry. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. Marjorie plastered on her sweetest smile for authority face. "Deputy Hargrove, thank goodness you're here. We are carrying out an emergency safety procedure approved by the board last night." "Emergency my foot," Cole muttered. "I didn't approve anything." "You don't have to," she snapped. "This is HOA jurisdiction." "Not over the lakefront," Cole shot back. "And not over Mercer property, if that's what this still is." Her mask slipped. "If, Deputy, this man is committing repeated acts of trespass and obstruction." Cole turned to me. "Eli, did you get what you said you would?" I nodded and handed him the thick envelope I'd prepared last night. Blueprint photos, ledger scans, copies of the forged maps, land plats, and a detailed report of boundary stake tampering. Cole flipped through the documents right there, jaw tightening. The wind tugged at the papers, fluttering them like wings wanting to escape. "This," he said slowly, "changes everything." Marjorie's face drained of color. "Deputy," she sputtered, "those documents were stolen from HOA property. He broke into our building." Cole closed the envelope firmly. "According to these records, the hall sits on Mercer land, which means the basement and everything in it belongs to the Mercer estate. You can't steal your own property." "That's nonsense," she snapped. "But," Cole continued evenly, "what you're doing right now, destroying a structure on contested land, is illegal until proven otherwise." The bulldozer operator froze, glancing nervously between the deputy and the HOA president. I stepped forward. "You need to stop this now." Marjorie jabbed a finger at me. "Too late! Activate the seizure order." From her coat pocket, she pulled a folded document and waved it like a victory flag. The board members straightened. The bulldozer roared back to life. But Cole stepped directly in front of the machine, hand raised, palm out. "You put that blade down," he told the operator, "or I'll cite you for destruction of property under active investigation." The operator hesitated. He wasn't loyal to Marjorie, just paid by the hour. Slowly, the bulldozer's engine settled into a quieter idle. Marjorie exploded. "You can't interfere! The judge approved the order." "Judge Harmon?" Cole asked, voice dangerously calm. "The same one who's under ethics review for approving HOA seizures without survey verification." Her lips thinned. "This is none of your concern." Cole looked her dead in the eyes. "It is now." He lifted the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Hargrove. I need county attorney assistance at Mercer Lake immediately. Possible forged property documents and unauthorized demolition." Marjorie's eyes went wide. "You're calling the county attorney?" "You forced my hand," Cole said. "This is no longer between the HOA and Mr. Mercer. This is county jurisdiction now." Her voice cracked, not with fear, but with fury. "You don't know what you're doing." Cole didn't respond. He was busy flagging down the workers and ordering them to step away from the machinery. I felt a swell of relief, but not victory. Not yet. Because I saw something in Marjorie's expression I hadn't seen before. Desperation. Not the petty kind that comes from losing control of a meeting or losing face in front of neighbors. This was deeper. This was someone watching a fortress crumble from the inside. Dana jogged up seconds later, camera ready, Reed right behind her. They had captured everything, from the bulldozer's approach to Marjorie's meltdown. "You okay?" Dana asked quietly. "For now," I said. Cole joined us. "County Attorney Lana Brooks is on her way. She wants to see the evidence herself." Across the yard, Marjorie paced like a cornered animal, phone pressed to her ear. Every so often she looked toward us, her eyes tight, calculating, furious. Dana whispered, "She's losing grip." "No," Reed said. "She's losing everything." The wind kicked up again, rattling the dock boards. Dawn light spilled across the lake, sharp and silver. Somewhere across the water, a truck door slammed. And in the distance, heading down the long gravel road, the county attorney's convoy approached, 3 white SUVs rolling slow and deliberate. Marjorie stopped pacing. She looked at the approaching vehicles, then at me, and for the first time since this began, she looked afraid. The law was here now, and the truth was coming with it. The 3 white county SUVs rolled down the gravel road like slow-moving judgment. Dust clouds rose behind them and drifted across the lake, thinning into the cold Wyoming air. Every head on my property turned toward the approaching convoy. Even the bulldozer operator shut off his engine and stepped down from the cab, suddenly wanting no part of what was about to unfold. County Attorney Lana Brooks stepped out of the lead SUV the moment it stopped. Early 40s, sharp eyes, colder posture than the morning wind. She didn't waste a second. She walked straight toward Deputy Cole, boots biting into the frost-hardened ground. "Deputy Hargrove," she said. "You said urgent, and you said property fraud. That earns a personal visit." Cole nodded. "Ma'am, we've got conflicting documents, questionable seizures, and an attempted demolition." She raised a brow. "Demolition?" Her gaze drifted toward the bulldozer by the lake. "On contested land?" Marjorie stepped forward with desperate confidence, the kind built on years of bullying. "Mrs. Brooks, thank you for coming. I assure you, this is a simple misunderstanding. The Clearwater Ridge HOA had emergency authorization." "Quiet!" Lana didn't raise her voice, but the single word cut through Marjorie's sentence like a blade. "I'll speak to the property owner first." Marjorie's face twisted. "He's not the owner." Cole gestured for me to step forward. "This is Eli Mercer. He holds the original deed." Lana turned to me, her tone immediately shifting from sharp to professional. "Mr. Mercer, Deputy Hargrove says you have documentation I should see." I handed her the envelope, blueprints, plats, photos, and the ledger, each page a piece of the truth Marjorie had buried. Lana opened it, her fingers steady, though I saw her breath pause when she reached the blueprint. She unfolded it onto the hood of her SUV. The county seal caught the light. The Mercer signature glowed faintly in the morning sun. She looked up at Marjorie. "Where is your copy of the land transfer?" Marjorie stiffened. "The hall was legally approved and annexed. I asked for a transfer, Mrs. Elliston. A sale, a donation, a recorded relinquishment." Lana's tone sharpened. "Produce it." One of the board members whispered, We don't have a transfer. We only have the annexation vote." "Annexation does not override private ownership," Lana said flatly. She reached into the envelope again and pulled out the ledger. The cracked leather cover creaked as she opened it. Her eyes scanned the entries page by page. Fraud. Fake signatures. Illegal expansions. Stolen land. When she reached the line reading Mercer Tract, unclaimed, seized by vote, she froze. Then she whispered something I'd only ever heard county officials mutter when they knew a storm was coming. "Oh, hell." Lana snapped the ledger shut and turned toward Marjorie. "Mrs. Elliston," she said, "you and your board have exceeded your authority by an unimaginable margin. This ledger alone is grounds for a full audit, but combined with these blueprints and maps, your HOA has been operating illegally for years." Marjorie's voice cracked. "That's not... You don't... That blueprint was stolen. He broke into..." Lana pointed at her sharply. "If this hall truly sits on Mercer land, then that basement, those documents are his property. You can't accuse someone of stealing from themselves." The board members shifted nervously. Someone muttered, "I told you we shouldn't have moved the markers." Lana examined the blueprint again and then lifted her radio. "This is County Attorney Brooks requesting immediate injunction paperwork. Freeze all HOA operations at Clearwater Ridge pending investigation." Marjorie lunged forward. "No, you can't do that. We have authority." "Not anymore," Lana said. "Your authority was built on land theft and forged signatures." Cole stepped to my side, lowering his voice as Marjorie began pacing in small, frantic circles. "This is the biggest HOA mess I've ever seen." "Not just HOA," Reed added from behind us. "This is theft of a community." Dana snapped several photos. Marjorie's panicked pacing, the blueprint on the SUV hood, Lana cataloging the ledger. The bulldozer stalled inches from my dock. Every picture a piece of a story that would echo through this valley for years. Lana turned toward the gathered residents who'd wandered down from nearby homes, drawn by the shouting and flashing lights. "For the record," she announced, "the Clearwater Ridge HOA charter is hereby suspended pending legal review. All payments, fines, and violation enforcement are frozen effective immediately." A gasp rippled through the small crowd. One woman wiped tears from her eyes. "They fined me $5,000 for painting my shutters." A man beside her murmured, "They tried to evict us for a compost bin." People began talking all at once. Whispered confessions, pent-up anger, stories of harassment, all spilling into the cold air like they'd been held back for years. Lana held up a hand. "We will investigate every claim." Marjorie tried one last time, voice cracking like thin ice. "Mr. Mercer has no right to decide anything. This is our community." Lana turned to me, expression composed but decisive. "Actually," she said, "Mr. Mercer has every right to decide what happens to that building." She lifted the blueprint toward me. "The legal location of the HOA hall is entirely inside the Mercer boundary, built on Mercer land. That means until a judge says otherwise, it's your structure." I stared at her, stunned. The weight of her words hit harder than the icy wind brushing the back of my neck. She looked me in the eye. "So, Mr. Mercer, the question is simple." Her voice dropped into something soft but powerful. "Do you want to seize the building or dissolve the HOA?" The world went silent. Even the lake seemed to hold its breath. All eyes turned to me. Cole's steady gaze, Donna's hopeful one, Reed's nod of quiet encouragement, and Marjorie's wild stare of disbelief. Cold Wyoming wind swept across the yard, lifting the corners of the old blueprint like it, too, was asking for an answer. The moment sharpened into a fork in the road, a choice that would decide the future of every house in Clearwater Ridge. And I felt, for the first time, like my ancestors were standing right behind me. I had the power now, and justice demanded a choice. The wind coming off Mercer Lake cut cold across my face as every eye in Clearwater Ridge waited for my next breath. County Attorney Lana Brooks stood steady beside me, clipboard tucked under her arm. The blueprint rolled tight in her hand, like a verdict waiting to be spoken. Marjorie hovered only a few yards away, her blazer wrinkled, her composure shattered, her eyes darting like she was searching for a lifeline that no longer existed. I looked toward the hall, its stone siding catching the morning light, its windows reflecting the lake my great-grandfather once fished from. The building had always seemed imposing, regal even, but now that I knew the truth, that it stood on stolen Mercer land, it looked different, smaller, hollow, like a throne built on sand. A lifetime of my family's work had been twisted into a tool for control. And the people around me, neighbors I'd never met until this week, they'd lived under that weight for years. Dana stepped up beside me. "Whatever you choose," she whispered, "we're behind you." Reed crossed his arms, gaze fixed on the hall. "Your grandfather built this place for community, not tyranny. Time to return it to what it was meant to be." Deputy Cole nodded once. "Say the word, Eli." I took a slow breath. The lake rippled softly, like it was listening. "I'm not taking the building," I said finally. "I'm not seizing anything. That's not who my family is." Marjorie let out a strangled sound. Relief or rage, I couldn't tell. But before she could speak, I raised a hand. "But the HOA?" I continued. "That ends today." A hush swept through the crowd. Even the distant birds quieted. Lana gave a small, approving nod. "Dissolution it is." Marjorie lunged forward, her voice cracking. You can't dissolve us. This community needs structure. It needs rules. It needs fairness," I said calmly. "And it needs freedom, neither of which you offered." Her voice fell away, replaced by the choking sound of someone realizing their empire had been smoke all along. Lana turned to the assembled residents. "Effective immediately, Clearwater Ridge HOA is dissolved pending final court certification. A temporary community council will be formed, with oversight from my office until a fair election can occur." A wave of disbelief rippled through the neighbors. Then, slowly, relief. Tears glistened, shoulders softened. People hugged each other, murmuring, "Finally, and it's over, and we can breathe again." Marjorie stumbled back a step, grasping for something solid, but there was no ground left under her authority. Only consequences. Lana addressed her with professional coldness. "Mrs. Elliston, you will face charges for fraud, falsified filings, and attempted unlawful seizure. Please remain available. Investigators will contact you shortly." Marjorie's mouth opened, then closed. She had no fight left. With the chaos dissipating, Cole placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did right, Eli. This valley's been needing this for a long time." "I didn't do it alone," I said, glancing at Dana and Reed. Dana smiled softly. "Justice takes a team." Cole headed back to coordinate officers, leaving me with the lake stretching quiet and silver before us. I walked to the edge of the dock, untouched, intact. The sun rose higher, scattering light across the water in long, glittering lines. The same view my grandfather had loved, the same water I'd fished as a boy. And for the first time since returning, the lake looked like it belonged to the Mercers again. 2 weeks later, the hall stood silent under a fresh dusting of snow. County crews had taken full control of the building, cataloging every record inside, Gone were the HOA promotional banners and petty rule posters. In their place, blank walls waiting for a better purpose. The temporary community council gathered for the first time on a crisp morning. Lana attended the opening to set the tone, and after brief introductions, she turned to me. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "we'd like your input on the future of this building." I stepped up to the old podium, the same one Marjorie had used to bark orders and collect fines, and looked around the hall. Without her presence, it felt different, lighter. "I think," I said, "this building should become the Mercer Lake Community Center, a place for families, meetings, fishing lessons, barbecues, anything but the abuse it was used for." Soft applause broke out. Reed nodded, eyes warm. Dana captured it all with her camera. "It's time we honor the land," I added, "and the people who live on it." Lana smiled. Motion accepted. By spring, Mercer Lake was alive again. Kids skipped rocks across the surface. Fishermen lined the banks at dawn. Neighbors gathered for potlucks beneath the pines. The center hosted workshops, storytelling nights, and even a quilting circle that grew faster than expected. The fear that once hovered over Clearwater Ridge dissolved like mist on the water. And Marjorie? She pleaded guilty to several charges. The judge allowed supervised release while she awaited civil hearings. The fines alone would take her years to repay. The HOA board scattered, some apologizing publicly, others disappearing from meetings entirely. But the lake remained. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills gold, I walked the shoreline with my hands in my pockets. The breeze carried the scent of pine and new growth. The water glimmered calmly, reflecting a sky free of storm clouds. I paused where my grandfather once stood with me, his hand on my shoulder, telling me stories about this land, stories I hadn't understood then. "You fought for this," I whispered, thinking of him, of Samuel Mercer, of every ancestor whose work was buried beneath the hall's foundation. "I hope I did right by you." The gentle lapping of water against the rocks answered in place of words. I turned toward the community center. Light spilled from the windows, warm, inviting, alive. Laughter echoed faintly across the lake. They tried to erase my family, tried to rewrite our land, tried to claim our shoreline as their empire. But the land remembered, and now, so did the people. Justice wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't need to be. Sometimes justice was simply restoring what had been stolen and allowing a community to breathe again. I took one last look at the water, hands resting lightly on the old wooden railing of my grandfather's dock. The lake was ours again, and it would stay that way. The wind whispered through the pines like a promise kept, a story finished, a legacy restored. If you've ever stood your ground for what's yours, drop a justice in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if you want more real, steady tales of land, dignity, and doing what's right, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.